Five Doctors, Story Heaven and Production Hell. November the 25th, 1983 wasn't an especially interesting day. Uptown Girl was top of the UK music charts, and Larry Holmes beat Marvin Fraser with a technical knockout. But for a certain 7-year-old, me, it was a day that will forever stay in my memory. For it was the day a Cyberman terrified me by grabbing the Brig's arm through a wall, and a lone Dalek chased the Doctor and Susan into a seemingly dead end for them to face extermination. But more importantly, I got to see on screen the Doctors and companions I'd only read about in my beloved Target Doctor Who novels. I was seeing all my heroes in the flesh, no longer having to rely on the Terence Dicks description adorning the pages of my well-read books. The importance of the date was lost on me, and it was some years later when I realised the gravity of what I was watching. This was the 20th anniversary special. Well, almost. So in today's video essay, I'll be taking a look at the Five Doctors and pay tribute to one of my personal favourite stories of all time, and the huge production challenges it presented right from the first production meeting. And we'll take a deep dive into how and why they changed it from the 6 Doctors to the 5 Doctors during this process, who appeared and who didn't and why, and look at some lesser known behind the scenes stories of the 5 Doctors. Now, all fans of Doctor Who will know that the 5 Doctors was not the first multi-Doctor story. This accolade goes to the 1973 10th anniversary story, The 3 Doctors. This featured the return of William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton to join forces with the then Doctor Jon Pertwee. At the time, I'm sure this would have been a huge event, and one spoken about on the playgrounds of schools and canteens of work for a number of weeks in late 72 and into early 73. I'm also sure that the production of this story would have sown the seeds for future multi-Doctor stories. However, much like its successor 10 years later,
there you are!
The 3 Doctors encountered a number of production problems. Most notably, William Hartnell was gravely ill at the filming of the 3 Doctors, and his involvement was really limited to short appearances via the TARDIS monitor.
In a pretty pickle, aren't you?
This required some creative writing to include him, but to exclude him at the same time. This mirrored the challenges Tom Baker's absence posed in the 5 Doctors. The absence of any Doctor would obviously cause an imbalance to the story, as producer John Nathan Turner would discover. John Nathan Turner, or JNT, first mused over the idea of a special story for the 20th anniversary way back in 1981. He wrote a memo to David Reed, head of series and serials at the BBC in July of that year, setting out his plans to do something really spectacular for the anniversary. David Reed agreed, but suggested it be a 90-minute special as opposed to the usual episodic format. JNT and script editor Eric Saward set about thinking who could take on the mammoth task of bringing alive this script, and quickly decided on Robert Holmes. Holmes was an experienced Doctor Who writer, having penned a number of stories and served as a series script editor during a portion of the Tom Baker era. His writing creativity was responsible for the talons of Wen Chiang, considered by many as one of the finest classic Doctor Who stories. JNT and Saward sat with Robert Holmes and discussed the vision for the story, bring in an army of old companions and foes, tell a memorable story, and of course, give all 5 Doctors a meaningful role to play. Understandably, Holmes was reluctant. He had some concerns over the quality of the story he would be able to output, taking into consideration the production team wish list. Holmes went on to pitch 3 options to JNT for a story, with the preferred option being the one that went on to resemble the finished story the closest. It was set on the planet Maladoom. The opening scene was to be Doctor 1 and Susan walking across a misty moorland. And this was being watched on video with a mysterious voice saying, "Really lifelike." Later in the story, it was established that Doctor 1 and Susan were actually cyborgs, created by cyber technology. Holmes, in an example of his exceptional storytelling ability, suggested this cyber version of Doctor 1 could explain his change of appearance from William Hartnell, as the role had been recast.
No.
The original version was titled The 6 Doctors, due to the involvement of a fake First Doctor. The pitch went on to have various incarnations of the Doctor arrive, with the Master making an alliance with the Cybermen. The intention of the Cybermen was to capture and perform surgery on the incarnations of the Time Lord to discover the biological organic mechanism that distinguished Time Lords from all other species. As can be seen, some of this proposal did find its way into the final script, albeit in a very different way to in which Holmes first imagined. Much of his original pitch did form part of his own later 1985 script for the 2 Doctors. Holmes continued his script development over the summer of 1982, but the sheer complexity and timescales involved resulted in J&T and Seward taking the project to another veteran of Doctor Who for completion. Terence Dicks, just like Robert Holmes, had been both a writer and script editor for the series. He picked up the script from Holmes and made some immediate changes in an attempt to both streamline the story and make the complex production a little easier to achieve. He also felt very strongly that it should be set on Gallifrey and feature the Time Lords. Eric Seward later spoke on this topic to Doctor Who magazine. The main problem was that there was 5 leading men plus companions, and so it was a matter of giving them all something to do that contributed to the story, advanced the plot and so on. The other thing was that we didn't want to bring them together too soon, because we wanted the fun, enjoyment and nostalgia of them doing their own bit with their old companions. This proved difficult simply through sheer numbers. Terence rose to the occasion admirably. We had a long meeting one afternoon with John, and out of that came a lot of what became the 5 Doctors. Terence Dicks set about tuning the script to involve all the Doctors, companions, monsters, all the time ensuring that there was a narrative rather than just a number of set-piece segments. Something Dicks formulated from an early stage was the concept of a game, with him visioning a black-gloved hand moving pieces around a chessboard. It was here that the structure of the story really started to take form, with the final script settling on Barusa collecting all the different incarnations of the Doctor and dropping them into the death zone of Gallifrey. With the script now agreed upon, and Dicks working hard to meet production deadlines, the attention of John Nathan Turner turned to securing the services of the actors he wanted for the story. The first challenge, apparent from a very early stage, was the question of the first Doctor. William Hartnell passed away, so Doctor 1 either needed recasting or his absence worked around into the story.
There's a possible solution.
Likely learning from the difficulties from the 3 Doctors, a decision was made to recast the role of Doctor 1 for this special. The first choice for J&T and John Pertwee, likely from working together on Wurzel Gummidge, was Geoffrey Baldon, a character actor who later went on to play the title role in the television programme Catweasel. For reasons unknown, this didn't come to fruition, and the role ultimately went to Richard Herndale, as J&T recalled him from a previous role in Blake 7. He sadly passed away only a few months after the television transmission of the 5 Doctors. Although relatively new to the producer role, John Nathan Turner knew most of the actors that played previous companions, and he also knew Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee due to their appearances together at many Doctor Who conventions. It's said that J&T would informally approach previous stars at these conventions and gauge their hypothetical interest in a hypothetical future story. The hard work was already done, and it seemed to have paid off. Both Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee were enthusiastic about a return, and in the case of Troughton, only a minor filming scheduling issue needed to be resolved. The respective agents were able to sign the contract with minimum fuss and in quick time. Tom Baker was much more of a headache for J&T. He'd only recently left the role and was notoriously mischievous.
State actually was more important. But you don't tell us. I don't know what I know. I'm going.
And his clashes with J&T are well documented. Nonetheless, J&T approached Baker and provided him with an early copy of the script. J&T knew how important it was to have Tom in the story given his popularity, especially in Australia and the US. It's rumoured that J&T secured the services of Elizabeth Sladen very early on in production to entice Tom to return. Unfortunately, after much deliberation, Tom pulled out of the project, giving J&T a casting headache. Over the years, various reasons have been given for this, including by Tom himself. The almost accepted truth is that Tom was reluctant, as he'd only just left the role after a really long period, and couldn't see himself playing only 1/5 of the main role, given the fact that his Doctor was so dominant. J&T said of Tom's absence, "That was an extremely big hurdle to overcome, because we were saying up front that it's the 5 Doctors, and it was really 4 and a bit, and one of those was recast, so suddenly it started to look like it was falling around my ears." J&T come up with a possible solution. Footage of Tom Baker and Lalla Ward, Romana 2, was available from an unbroadcast story from season 17, Sharda. J&T's bold plan was to weave this footage into the 5 Doctors and task Terence Dicks to formulate a narrative to make this a meaningful part of the story. Dicks delivered as best he could, and this resulted in Doctor 4 appearing in the 5 Doctors using, technically, new footage. Both Tom Baker and Lalla Ward agreed to the use of this footage. Dix later said of the Sharda workaround, "It was amazing how well the scene from Sharda fitted in. I'll swear that if you didn't know, you would think it was written for the special." 7-year-old me had no idea that this was from a previous story, so it fooled me. I often wonder if it fooled any adults watching. Shortly after transmission, a viewer wrote into the BBC publication Radio Times to complain about the lack of Tom Baker. J&T provided a written response. Baker had agreed to attend the publicity photo shoot for the story. J&T quite correctly anticipated that Tom would no-show, so somehow secured the waxwork of Tom Baker as the Doctor, borrowed from Madame Tussauds in London. On release of the photos to various media outlets, the newspaper editors were not fooled and actually run stories like "Who's Not Who?" But as they say in the business, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Based on what Terence Dix and Eric Sword later said about the intended role of Doctor 4 in the story, should Tom Baker have been available, it would change the entire dynamic of the story, especially the finale. For example, the script involving Doctor 4 would have seen him in the death zone rather than Doctor 5, and him stealing the transportation device from the Master before returning to Gallifrey to confront the Time Lords. Doctor 5 in this role is okay, but Doctor 4 would have been amazing. So J&T had the Doctors locked in. Now it was time to turn his attention to the companions. The original pairings were intended to be Doctor 1 with Susan, Doctor 2 with Victoria, Doctor 3 with Jo, and Doctor 4 with Sarah Jane. Due to availability, creative concerns, travel expenses, the final lineup looked like this. Doctor 1 was paired with Susan, Doctor 2 with the Brigadier, Doctor 3 with Sarah Jane, and Doctor 4 with Romana as a consequence of the Sharda footage. Other companions, or familiar faces as Dix liked to call them, indicated their availability and were worked into the script by Dix. John Levine was asked about a return of Sergeant Benton. Conflicting reports state that he was either unavailable or that he objected to a part of the script calling for him not to recognise the second Doctor. Either way, he didn't return. It seems most likely that given he lived in the US at the time of filming, his expenses for travel were not justified. It could be considered the same reason existed for Katie Manning's lack of return as Jo Grant, as she was living in Australia at the time. Budgeting for this special presented a problem for J&T. He wanted something spectacular, but the budget allocated for this story was included in the budget for season 21. Knowing this was unlikely to cover the vision, J&T struck a deal with the Australian Broadcasting Commission, as it was known at the time, which secured $60,000 Australian dollars to be added to the production pot. In today's money, that would be 125,000 British pounds or 168,000 US dollars. This deal meant that the ABC, as part of this payment, secured broadcast rights with no additional fee. This ABC involvement is what likely led to a fan theory in the 90s that the external shots were filmed somewhere in Australia. Now, I've never been to Australia, but I think you'd be challenged to find anywhere that looks quite like North Wales. In an act probably of loyalty and fan service, J&T initially approached Waris Hussein to direct. He was the director of the very first Doctor Who story.
Now you're being sentimental and childish.
And seemed a perfect fit for this project on paper. Hussein provided a very clear no to J&T, which resulted in J&T cancelling his invitation to attend an in-house BBC dinner celebrating the Doctor Who anniversary. Hussein gatecrashed this anyway. Director duties therefore fell to Peter Moffat, who had directed previous Doctor Who stories under J&T. Peter Moffat later said of this project, "To be honest, I didn't really understand why the Doctors were lifted one by one into the time scoop, and then prevented from doing what was required of them by so many obstacles being set in their paths. They were enticed and then repelled, but as I began to work on the script, I understood more and more. It was a game set for the satisfaction of Barusa, with the Doctors being reacted upon like pawns in a game of chess, and the more times I read the script, the more I appreciated the basic theme." Work was then undertaken by Moffat and J&T to identify a suitable external location for the Death Zone. In line with his intention of making the special look spectacular, and mindful of the international coverage of the story, J&T was very keen to avoid the usual Doctor Who quarry. Initially there was talk of Scotland, with its beautiful sweeping and isolated locations combined with a suitable climate to achieve the look and feel of Gallifrey. It was felt that given the amount of actors and production crew required using a location this far from London, this would both be costly and eat into the production schedule. Following additional research, Festiniog in North Wales was identified. After rehearsals in London, the crew set off for location filming on the 4th of March 1983. The production was coming together nicely. Filming at this location presented challenges. The weather was temperamental with drops in temperature and sudden manifestation of thick fog. Whilst this served a really nice artistic purpose on film, it's something that cast and crew really didn't enjoy at all. Cast and crew then returned to London to meet up with other cast members to complete the remainder of the external shots and then into studio filming. This story saw the introduction of a brand new, and in my humble opinion, best console room. Less roundels, better lighting, more modern aspects of the console, and reportedly easier to film and erect. This new console was subtly hinted at with a shot of Doctor 5 giving it a final dust in an opening scene. This story required more special effects than most others, given the intended alien location and abundance of different enemies the Doctor and his companions were going to meet. The use of effect mats and, at the time, state-of-the-art Quantel image processor to create effect composites contributed heavily to this story. Eagle-eyed fans later noticed that the name of the Doctor, albeit in Gallifreyan, appeared on the obelisk in this story. This wasn't intentional, but the result of the production team using a copy of the 1972 book The Making of Doctor Who as a source for the Gallifreyan text. I expect they simply used a symbol that they did not expect ever to be cross-referenced to this book. If you were one of the fans that genuinely noticed this, this alone gives you the credential you need to be considered a superfan of the highest order. One of my favourite scenes watching this was the Dalek scene. I loved the Daleks, I was terrified of the Daleks. I was still at that hide behind the sofa age. The Dalek scene almost didn't make it to production, with concerns around budgetary constraints and complexities of moving Daleks around on location, especially on the terrain it was to be filmed on. The problems which faced the Dalek props on location in Destiny of the Daleks was likely not forgotten. Terence Dicks overcame this in his script by scaling the Dalek down to one prop and setting it within a studio. While the Dalek is at best a cameo, I can't imagine this story without it. It's reported that both JNT and Terence Dicks insisted on a Dalek being present. Can you imagine a 20th anniversary Doctor Who story without a Dalek? The scene was expertly directed using mirrors, shadows and reverse shots of the Dalek, giving a sense of a much bigger set and creating some real anxiety. Dalek 6388, the absolute definitive source of Dalek prop info, report that the hero Dalek prop used in this story was Dalek 17. This prop was in a state of disrepair and was fitted with some unusual orange dome lights. The top of the prop was replaced with a dummy section for the explosion shot. On initial consideration, it was unclear why this Dalek prop was used because it was in such poor condition. Admittedly, most of the Dalek props that the BBC had in their possession at the time were in poor condition, but in what could be the greatest Easter egg planted by J&T to be discovered 20 years down the line was the fact that Dalek 17 was the original, you might say. It was the first ever Dalek prop built, first seen on screen in December 1963. Well, the top section of it anyway, hence 17. The 7 relates to the skirt or bottom section, which was made as part of a 1965 prop and combined with the top section at some stage later. Just like the Lonely Dalek, many of the costumes and props were reused from previous productions, rather than commissioned for this story. The Cybermen costumes were reused from Earthshock. The only major change appears to be the mouth gauze used in Earthshock to show the jaw of the Cybermen when speaking is more opaque here. I can only speculate that this was due to the synchronisation of the cyber voices being much harder to dub over a moving jaw as opposed to a blank area. This is mere speculation on my part, but does seem reasonable. However, we do have photographs of the Cybermen actors on location with silver paint on their chin. The costume of the Chancellery Guard were 8 years old from the Deadly Assassin and didn't fit the new actors especially well. The prop costume for the Yeti had been in storage for much longer and was now in very poor condition, resulting in that segment being filmed in very low light to hide this. Filming was wrapped on the 30th of March 1983, with post-production starting shortly after. This process involved the adding of effects by Doctor Who and BBC effects veteran Dave Chapman. Then editing, previewing, more editing, and then handing over to the BBC legendary radiophonic workshop for sound effects and score. A memorable sound effect from the story of that of Rassilon's horn. which was created using a sample of the hooter from the Queen Mary, resampled heavily. Peter Howe of the Radiophonic Workshop asked J&T if he could try merging the original 1963 Delia Derbyshire arrangement with his new theme that he introduced 3 years earlier into the closing credits. J&T approved this, and as a result we see this unique version on the closing credits. With all the hard work now completed, the story was prepared for transmission. J&T had hoped that it would be shown on the 23rd of November, the exact 20-year anniversary of the series. In a letter written to Who researcher David J. Howe, it seems as if the BBC did intend to broadcast this on the 23rd of November. However, for reasons unknown, it was moved to the 25th. I believe that the BBC wanted to make it a prime-time Friday night slot, and this sat very nicely within the Children in Need TV charity extravaganza that was showing that night. Because the UK version was delayed by 2 days, this meant that US viewers saw it on the true anniversary of the programme. In the US, it was shown on the Chicago station Window to the World, WTTW, and other PBS stations. In a twist worthy of Doctor Who, this was the same channel that a rerun of the Tom Baker story, The Horror Fang Rock, was illegally interrupted by the now infamous Max Headroom broadcast a few years later. Perhaps more of that in a future episode. 2 days after the US showing, the story was broadcast at 7:20 p.m. as part of the Children in Need special on BBC One in the UK. The spectacular, as J&T had imagined it, was introduced rather vaguely and without much fanfare by Terry Wogan.
Now, Doctor Who this time, of course, is an amalgamation of all 5 Doctor Whos. You won't believe it, I promise you.
One day, I shall come back.
Immediately after the UK transmission, Terry Wogan and Peter Davison appeared in a pre-recorded but really awkward segment where the Doctor, or Peter, Terry Wogan gets confused, donates his doctor's jacket for charity. It's really painful to watch.
Extraordinary place this. Perhaps I should bring you up to date on all that's been happening since you last left us at 7:20.
Hello, Terry. Very nice to see you.
Great heavens, it's the Doctor. I've only just seen you.
Yes, I've missed it.
And the 4 others.
That's right.
Yes. How'd you get on, all 5 of you?
Oh, very well, very well. No, it was a great experience.
No clash of Time Lord egos or anything?
No, not at all, not at all. Of course, we all thought we were the best, you know, each of us.
That's
Apart from that, there was no problem.
No comments, I noticed, about your ridiculous outfit or that.
No. It's not. Is it that ridiculous?
In fact, you're not with us, are you? Being a Time
No,
Lord.
at this very moment, I'm up in a jumbo jet somewhere on my way to Chicago.
There you go now.
That's right.
What are you going to Chicago for?
Oh, just 2 days for a Doctor Who convention. It's a jet-setting life, you know, Doctor Who. We just sit on panels and the fans ask us questions. And
Why do you need a jet? Couldn't you go on the TARDIS?
well, the trouble with the TARDIS is it doesn't always get you there in the right time zone. You know, one's liable to arrive before Columbus landed.
Exactly.
Yes.
So you've got, obviously, Doctor Who fans in America as well.
Oh, yes, thousands and thousands are expected this weekend. It's really a rather large sort of organisation they have over there.
Well, Star Trek fans are called Trekkies. What are Doctor Who fans called?
I believe they're called Whovians.
Whovians. Hoovers.
But Hoovers, perhaps.
Oh, very good. Hoorays. Now, what are you going to donate for our Children in Need appeal before you go? Well, in fact, now that you've gone.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we Gallifreyans don't carry money as such. Yes.
You could have done with the money, you know.
Indeed. But what more can I give you, really, than the coat off my back?
No man nor Time Lord can give more, Doctor Who. Thank you, Peter. That is smashing. What about where's the stick of celery?
The celery, yes.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, Terry, that being special Gallifreyan celery and having very special properties, I thought I'd best keep it in the TARDIS in case you felt a bit light-fingered, you know.
Well, we'll take the coat.
Right.
And excuse you the vegetable.
It's very, very nice to see you.
And you too, Doctor.
Bye-bye now.
Safe journey.
Thank you.
Oh, you've gone. And so, by cracky, he has.
It's up there with Tom Baker's appearance on Nationwide when he was talking about his departure from the role. The viewing figures were recorded at 7.7 million. Some of these would have been due to the sandwiching of the programme within the Children in Need special. However, the end story of the previous season, The King's Demons, reached 7.2 million viewers just 8 months earlier, so this viewing figure might be an accurate viewing for those specifically tuning in to watch Doctor Who. The story received mixed reviews at the time. The press were between indifferent to critical, however Doctor Who fans were much more enthusiastic, with the exception of those that were very frustrated about Tom Baker's absence. The Target Books novelisation for this story was special for two reasons. It was the only novelisation of a Doctor Who television story to be published before its UK television broadcast. Just a day, in fact, on the 24th of November 1983. This does support the position that the UK transmission was intended to be scheduled for the 23rd of November. It's unclear if this was ever obtained off the shelves by a UK fan before the next evening. If so, they would have had a pre-internet spoiler of some magnitude. The second was its marvellous shiny cover, illustrated by Andrew Skilleter. This took pride on my shelf for many years. Terence Dicks said of his novelisation of his script, "They were very keen to get the novelisation out as close to the show as possible. I'd finished writing it before I saw the final playback of the programme, which does explain some of the minor differences between the show and the book. For instance, Patrick's furry Yeti coat, which I didn't know he was wearing until I saw the show. It's that kind of thing. When they got to the caves, they had to put a little ceremonial entrance outside, with a torch. That wasn't in the script, but it gives them a torch to carry and explains how they could see where they were going in the caves. It's the Brigadier's cigarette lighter that they use in the book. Other things like Patrick talking about Zodin the Terrible came from a programmer's broadcast script which I got in the last stage of editing the book, so I knew pretty well every line and interjection, but nobody ever mentioned the fur coat. I wish I'd known. I would have written it into the script." The Five Doctors was an early BBC video release, being available in VHS and Betamax as early as 1985. I remember being off school sick and my dad bringing this home from the video store for me to watch with a bottle of Lucozade, as was the standard process in the 1980s. There are a number of main versions of the Five Doctors that have appeared over the years. The original US broadcast on WTTW-PBS, running for just over 90 minutes. The original UK broadcast mirroring the US broadcast, but with donation banners running across the bottom of the screen, much to the despair of the director. A UK repeat in a traditional 4-part format in the summer of 1984. A VHS and Betamax release in 1985. The first special edition containing effects, score and soundtrack changes was released in 1995. And this then became the first Doctor Who story to be commercially available on DVD in 1999. And finally, to bring us up to date, the Five Doctors got the high definition treatment in 2023, giving us the story in all its 1920 by 1080 resolution. So that's the story of the Five Doctors, a story that will forever remain close to my single heart. Thanks for watching, and I really do appreciate you staying this long. If you did enjoy this, go and check out my channel for lots more Doctor Who related nonsense. And if you really liked it, give me a like and a subscribe. It really does motivate me to do more.